theyeshiva.net.
It seems very complicated. It's somewhat complicated, but if you concentrate, you understand. But as I said, it's very important to do chazara of this Gemarah. Even if you understood it, it's just, without chazara and chazara and chazara until it really settles in. So, if a sheretz falls into a keli, the keli is a rishon.
Then it touches, so it can only if it touches.
So if this keli touches another keli, nothing happens. Because a keli can only become tameh from an av hatumah. A person in a keli will never be shenis biblically, ever. They can only be rishons. They can only go down till rishon. They can never be shenis. It just doesn't work. Because the Torah says clearly in Parshas Shmini that if a sheretz falls into a keli, the keli becomes tameh. We opened up the Chaim, and that keli will be metameh, the food and drinks in it. So we learn from this that keli can only transfer to food and drinks, nothing else.
And then the food and drinks? The drink?
So the food and drink, so the keli is a rishon, the food is now a sheni, and it can't transfer to anything else, besides truma.
But the drink came back to being a rishon.
Oh, so that's just biblically. Right. This is all biblically.
Oh, okay.
So the keli touched a sheretz, the keli is a rishon. The keli touches food, because I put food into my keli. The food, if it was muksher, if it got wet before, becomes a sheni. But a sheni doesn't transfer anymore. So if this food is now put in with other food or other drinks, it's fine. It's nothing. Besides truma. Truma is super sensitive. So truma is very allergic even to the tiniest particle of tumah. I'm just using the word particle as a metaphor. And it will become tameh. And if it's karbanis, it'll go even one more generation. But that's it. So that's the process. Truma will become a shlishi. If it touches a sheni, if it touches a rishon, it'll be a sheni, of course. The chiddush of truma is that it could be a shlishi. Of course, it could be a rishon. If a dead sheretz falls on truma, it's a rishon, right? If it touches a rishon, it's a sheni. The chiddush of truma is it could be even a shlishi. In other words, even if it touches a sheni, it's still possible. That's the chiddush. Of course, truma could be a sheni and a rishon. Of course. Truma, because it's so sacred. And a carbon, the food of karbanas, the meat of karbanas, is even holier than truma, right? Because truma, a kohen can eat anywhere. Truma, you can eat in the whole Eretz Yisrael. You have to eat it when you're pure. Only a kohen can eat it. His family can eat it. His avadim can eat it. But you have to be pure. But you can eat it anywhere. A carbon, you can't bring out of Yerushalayim. A carbon is much more sacred. Also, truma, you can eat by day, by night. There's no limit. Karbanas have a prescribed time, a prescribed place. It's a much more intense level of holiness. It can only be eaten within Yerushalayim or sometimes only within the Azara, within the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, kachim are much more sensitive. So they pick up even a sub-atomic particle of tumah. I just made up a word. In other words, they pick up something that truma won't pick up, right? It's like when you have a sensitive immune system, so to speak, in the negative, you'll pick up things and they will affect you in a way that other people won't be affected because you're so sensitive. But it's not only in the negative, also in the positive. People who are very spiritually sensitive, they cannot tolerate things that other people tolerate. That sometimes a person is just so sensitive. For other people, it's fine. And you're not going to protest it. It's fine. It's 100% fine. Potato chips is fine. But for this person, it's a killer. He's going to be in a depression for a day. Because he's sensitive. Sometimes an Eidel and a Neshama cannot tolerate things that other people... And you have to know this about yourself. Sometimes what for other people is tolerant for you, you will go crazy from it. It will not work for you. It will destroy you. And therefore stay away from it. Just stay away from it. Certain environments, certain toxicity, for other people it may work. But for you it will not work. You just have to know these things. Kachim is very, very sensitive to this most subtle toxicity. And therefore it becomes puzzle. You can't eat it anymore. It does. It goes to Revi. No, Truma Shlishi and Kachim Revi. Of course it can go up. If a sheni touches a carbon, it becomes a sheni. If Truma touches it and Truma is a Shlishi, it becomes a Revi. So this is all on one level. There's the concept that the rabbis instituted that mashka always becomes a rishon. That's a unique chiddush.
was asking you, why didn't you mention it by the rest? And I had to do
That's a chiddush. That liquid that becomes tamei is always bumped up to rishon. It's a unique chiddush that the chachamim were geyser. Even if a shlishi touches mashkin, it's nothing.
Oh, it doesn't even.
Does nothing. Yeah.
Doesn't do anything.
big chiddush.
But if a rishon touches mashkin, it should be a sheni, right? No, it's a rishon. And the chiddush is even if a sheni touches mashkin, which you would think is nothing unless it's truma, right? It still becomes a rishon. It still becomes a rishon. From shlishi, nothing happens. And if a tvul yoim touches mashka, it still doesn't become a rishon.
Even though it's a little bit like a shake.
A tvul yoim is a little like a sheni in the sense that if it touches truma, it's a shlishi. But since it's a weak tumah, because actually you're going up, you went to the mikveh already. You're just waiting for the time. So therefore, we're not geyser that the mashkin over there should become a rishon. If you touch mashkin, nothing happens. If it's mashka of truma, it'll be a shlishi because it's truma. But it's not. You're not going to have this chumrah of going back up. And the chachamim were not afraid that if you're lenient on a tvul yoim, yeah, it's going to ruin the situation. Rashi says because it's a din in Torah, and anything that's a din in Torah, the chachamim were not afraid of.
Tumah at that point, full yom.
If a tvul yom touches truma, the truma becomes possible to eat. B'chol kodesh lo yisiga. B'chol kodesh lo yisiga. Yeah.
Connected is the same.
No, two separate things. The reason that all mashka is tchila is not connected that mashka is metame keli. It's two separate gzeidas. Yeah. The gzeida of mashka and liyas tchila is poshet. Mashka is very common. Remember, water is free. Food is not free. So it's very prevalent. This is how I understand it. It's very prevalent. It's also makabel tumah very fast. Oichlin needs hechsher. Matos-Maasei. So in Mele, it was much more prevalent for mashka to get tummy than for oichlin to get tummy. Verstehst? The oichlin, the tumah is much more limited. Mashka is more, it's more prevalent, there's more mashka, it's free, and it's easier. You don't have to, yeah. If I'm tummy in the morning, I touch an egg or a bagel, it's not tummy. There was no hechsher. I didn't want it to get wet, even if it got wet. My mashka gets tummy right away. I touch an apple, it's not tummy. I touch wine, it's tummy. I touch water, it's tummy. So the chachamim saw mashkin is getting tummy all the time. When the mashkin touches truma, it right away becomes tummy. Because the mashka is, let's say, a rishon, or the mashka is a sheni, yeah, touches truma becomes a shlishi. So a lot of truma was becoming tummy. So they thought, what can we do? A kohen came down in the morning, yeah, he was tummy, he touched a sheretz or a balkari, yeah. He drank a cup of water, he touched the water. He touched the water. It's not a big deal, right? The water became a sheni. The kohen thought to himself, okay, Greisa Gedul, it became a sheni. So what? What's going to happen? Became a sheni. If it touches bread, nothing happens because a sheni doesn't make a shlishi. If it touches truma, it's a problem. I'll make sure it doesn't touch truma. Yeah. This water now comes to the table. Yeah. Yeah. If it touches bread, nothing happens. Okay. What happens? Your kid takes the wine and pours it on the challah of truma in the pantry. Now the truma is tummy. What was the problem? The problem is you allowed that mashka to become tummy. Why did you allow it to become tummy? Because you thought it's going to stop right here because it's a sheni and it's not going to go further. It's not going to be metame the challah. So what did they do? They said the mashka is a rishon. So when you're metame that water and it stays a rishon forever, remember it doesn't have any tara until you throw it in the garbage. So now if it touches another mashka, it becomes a rishon. If it touches another mashka, that also becomes a rishon. Right? If it touches lechem, the lechem becomes a sheni. Yeah, if that lechem touches mashka, that also becomes a rishon. So now the whole house, before you know it, is tameh, and the truma is going to become tameh every year. The kohen is like, oh, don't give me any headaches. I don't need the headaches. You understand their issue?
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
You understand? If the mashka would have been a sheni, okay, it's a sheni, it stops. And if it touches another mashka, nothing happens. But now you know that this mashka is not going to be a sheni. This mashka is going to be a rishon. And the rishon is going to go forever. It's going to be never. It's going to be endless. You understand? It's mamash going to be endless. Mamash endless. It can go to 1,000 mashka. They'll all be a rishon. You don't have such a thing. And if it touches lechem, the lechem becomes a sheni. If the lechem touches a mashka, it becomes a rishon. And that rishon makes another rishon, another rishon, another rishon. So how many things could make now the truma? Now the truma could become tummy from everything. It could become tummy from the mashka. It could become tummy from the lechem. It could become tummy from the mashka that touched the lechem. And it's going to spread and spread and spread. So the client says, this cup of water that I touched, it's not a sheni. It's not stopping here. If it touches the lechem becomes a sheni. If it touches another liquid, it becomes a rishon. That means the truma could become so easily tummy because the whole house is now going to be tummy if it comes in tummy. It makes mashka. Mashka will make other mashka rishon and other oichel sheni. And if it touches a keli, it'll make the keli a sheni. That's a separate thing. It goes back. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lashon of Chazal, that when oichel, let's say lechem is a sheni, yeah? Let's say a person touches a sheretz. I touch a sheretz. I'm a rishon. I touch bread, so the bread becomes a sheni, yeah? The bread touches liquid, right? So now the liquid becomes a rishon. So it's a fascinating thing. The bread is a sheni, the bread becomes a, and then liquid becomes a rishon.
Touch the mashkin becomes an avatumah, sort of. I'm saying.
It's a funny thing.
Because it's turning it always back to rishon.
Huh?
It's always turning it back to
Yeah.
rishon.
Now this mashka that became a rishon, which touched bread that was a sheni, touches another piece of bread. That piece of bread now becomes a sheni. So the Chazal say that piece of bread turns to the water and says, the one who made you tameh couldn't make me tameh. But you, metamecha loy timasani, va'ata timasani. It's a Mishnah. The guy who didn't make you tameh, the one who made you tameh couldn't get to me. If I would have touched that lechem, nothing would happen, right? Why? Because that lechem was a sheni, and sheni doesn't travel unless it's truma. So the one who, your father, your mucker, your share didn't make me tameh. And you, who's a makabel from him, you became a bigger monster. It's a fascinating lashon. Yeah, the guy who made you tameh, the source, he couldn't get to me. Nothing happened. You who have everything you have from him, you made me tameh.
You made me a strong tumah.
A strong tumah. You made me. No, the lechem. The lechem tells the mashka. The lechem that made you rishon couldn't make me anything. But you're a makabel. This is in the positivity. Yofe koyach haben mikoyach ha'av. Yofe koyach haben mikoyach ha'av. The koyach haben is everything from the ben comes from the av. Yeah. But no, Yofe koyach haben mikoyach ha'av. The ben brings out a whole new koyach. The oichel makes tummy the mashka, but when the mashka gets tummy, it gets tummy in a unique way, in its own way, unique way. It's a whole new tumah, to the point that it can make lechem tummy. How does that happen? It's a gewaldige chiddush. And you have it also in positivity. Yeah? Mitalmida yosem mikulam. That's what we learned in the Maimer. Talmida yosem mikulam. The teacher gives the Talmud, so everything he has to do. But the Talmud is bringing out a whole new aimek that the teacher never had on his own. He brings it out. He gets it from the teacher. But when he gets it, when it gets filtered through him, it goes through a transformation. And it becomes a whole new metzius. And it can have an impact that the teacher couldn't have. Interesting, yeah? The teacher couldn't have that impact. The teacher couldn't get to that third one. And the student, well, how does he get to him? Because something happens in the process. When the mashka becomes tummy through the lechem, it goes through such a tumah, it becomes tummy in a way that it's a rishon. It's a whole new tumah. It spreads it in a new way. So you have it also in positivity that way. Huh?
Is the reason the mashka is so...
The shliach does something that the meshaleach kavayachol couldn't do. Huh?
What you were talking about yesterday, about...
The mesuvav becomes more powerful than the sibba. But even the exceptions in Tumah and Tara have a rhythm. There's no... but there's a rhythm. Like what we learned yesterday about mashkin, right? That every mashkin becomes a rishon. It's not stam out of the blue. It created a certain awareness and a caution in every Jewish home, especially by Koyanim, that protected them from Tumah and the Truma from Tumah. and the food from Tumah. Huh?
The example that you just said, when he wakes up in the morning, so he goes to the mikveh. Before he went to
If a kohen is a balkari or anybody's a balkari and you go to the mikveh, you're good. If you touch chulin, you're good. But you still have to wait for hariv shemesh. You have to wait for nightfall to touch truma. Or to eat truma, of course. So that he has to wait. That's not a question. Even if he goes to the mikveh. But before the mikveh, everything is becoming tameh. As a sheni. Right? So now I have a cup of orange juice. Or let's do a cup of water so it works for the Ramos. A cup of water. I drink water in the morning. Yeah? So the kohen takes the water, right? He touches the water. He thinks to himself, okay, the water will become a sheni. So what happens? Even if this water pours on the challah, right? On regular challah, nothing happens because a sheni doesn't travel to chulin, right? It's a big deal. It's not such a big deal because the tumah is ending right here because sheni doesn't travel.
Be careful not to touch it to truma.
Yeah, the truma is in the cabinet. I don't have to worry because it's not going to be metama the regular bread. But you say, well, no, mashka is a rishon. So that means if it's on the table and it pours a little bit on the, the vegetables or the bread or the salad, now everything is tameh here. And it becomes a shame, now everything is going to be metama truma. So it made you pause. And it's like, there's a liquid here. We don't want this liquid to become tameh. And now it's safeguarded, right? Everything else, especially the truma.
if that Kohen drank water out of a keli, it would make the water a rishon, but it wouldn't make the keli. It wouldn't look the tongue of the keli. If the water's not held it.
If the kohen touched the keli would not become tummy because a keli can only be an av or a rishon, right? A keli could never be a sheni biblically. Let's remember. Right. If the kohen is a zav, he's an avatuma. He's an av. So if he touches a keli, if he's a zav, if a kohen is a zav, he's an avatuma. Anybody who's a zav. Rishon. Yeah. So if I'm an avatuma, I will be metame kelim. Right. Yeah. Right. So if I'm an avatuma, I can be metame everything. Another person, utensils, foods, drinks. Right? But if I'm a rishon l'tuma, I can't be metame another person or another utensil. I can only be metame foods and liquids, biblically speaking. The rabbis introduced this fascinating concept. Yeah. That, what I said yesterday, that a mashka could be metame a keli. A mashka could be metame a keli and make it a sheni. Yeah. In other words, any mashka that becomes tameh and it comes in contact with a keli, biblically nothing would happen because it's a rishon. Mashka is a rishon, right? But the Chachamim made that prohibition, that tumah. Why? A very practical reason. There's one type of liquid that is an avatuma, and that is the saliva and urine of a zav or a zava. If that would fall into a keli, the keli would become a rishon and it would be metame truma, right? So they were afraid that if I have liquid that's tummy in a keli, and I say, oh, nothing happens to the keli, because the keli can't be a sheni, so it's good. What's going to happen? One day, by mistake, I might have the liquid of a zav in the keli. And I'll say, oh, that's nothing. And what happens? I'll put truma there. And now the truma is tameh. Because the truma went into a keli that became a rishon from the avatuma of the saliva of the zav. So that's why they said, all mashkin that's tameh will make the keli a sheni. That way you will never, ever allow mashkin that's tameh into a keli, and you will safeguard, this is a buffer zone, you will protect the keli from being really tameh biblically from a mashke that would be an ava tumah, which would make truma tameh if it goes into that keli. That way, kalim were now protected from tumas mashkin, which was a tremendous buffer zone, a tremendous protection, a geder, a fence, that truma would not become tameh in the houses of koyanim when you put them in a keli that touched mashkin, which may be an avatuma. So that's why they made a klal. All mashkin that are tameh, which we know now rabbinically become a rishon, will always turn the keli that they're in into a sheni. So if a kohen is tameh, let's say a kohen is a rishon, right? A kohen is a rishon. Let's say he touches an avatuma, a kohen touches a sheretz, or any other way that he becomes a rishon. He touches shichva zera, he touches a sheretz, he touches a nevela, he touches a person who touched a mace. He's not an av, he's a rishon. Yeah. Now he touches a keli. Nothing happens to that keli because a keli can't become a sheni. Right? If he touches food, the food becomes a sheni. If he touches liquid, the liquid becomes a sheni biblically. But rabbinically, the food becomes a sheni, the liquid becomes a rishon. Because all mashkin become rishon, right? Even mashkin that touch a sheni become a rishon. Certainly mashkin that touch a rishon become a rishon. Now, this mashka, let's say it's wine, I touch my wine. Now this wine goes into a keli. You would think nothing happens to this keli. Why? Because mashkin can't be metame kelim. The mashkin, even if the mashkin is a rishon, but a rishon can't be metame kelim. You're right with food, but mashkin, there's a rabbinic gzeira that it's metame kelim to become a sheni. This is the time that a keli can be a sheni only rabbinically, not biblically.
So Kohen drinks, is in that situation, he's a rishon.
So the kohen is a rishon.
He drinks water.
He not drinks, he touches water.
Touches it, I mean,
If you pour water into him, right, that water is in him, so you're good.
but when he's drinking, he's touching the water, and there's some water left in the kli.
So if he touches water, that water, instead of being a sheni, becomes a rishon rabbinically. And it will now pass on tumah to the kli that it's in, presently or later. And that keli will become a sheni, l'tumah, until you put it in the mikveh. Again, you could put the keli in the mikveh, unless it's a klei cherah.
Or it needs to be broken.
If it's earthenware pottery, you have to break it and then put it back together, or throw it in the garbage. Klei cheres, klei cheres is too, mikveh doesn't work with it. By the way, just people don't realize, there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch called davar shetibulei b'mashka, right? Davar shetibulei b'mashka, you're familiar with? That needs natilas yadayim, right? Something, when you eat a food and you dip into the oil, let's say, right? Or you dip into salt water. Karpas and salt water. Why do we wash our hands before? The reason is one reason people don't realize. It's mamish the same reason why we wash for bread. Why do we wash for bread? Because our yadayim rabbinically have a status of sheni, not biblically. Biblically, your hands can become tameh if the rest of your body is not tameh. Min HaTorah, there's no tumah on your hands. It's either everywhere or nowhere. Shloimeh tikein, tumas yadayim. Yeah. Why did Shloimeh do this? Why? A very interesting reason. It was a very practical reason. You know, today we're used to sinks and bathrooms and soap, and wherever you go, disinfectors and they have signs, all employees have to wash their hands, which means if you're not an employee, you should also be a mensch. We just can't tell you all these concepts. But remember, there was not even access to water. Before the Industrial Revolutions, even today in third world countries, you go to the Ukraine, there's cities, they're still going to the well to get water. It's not like we're running sinks in every house with bathrooms. None of this existed. So Natilas Yadayim was not a very simple thing. Just like going to the mikveh was not a simple thing. Today we have beautiful mikvahs and heated mikvahs and hot mikvahs. You didn't have all of this. You didn't have heaters. You had the sun during the day. Or you made an oven, you built a fire. What often would happen is, this is one of the reasons, a kohen would eat truma, okay? His hands were very dirty. Because his hands were very dirty, what might happen is, he may want to dispose the truma. And what happens to this kosher truma? It goes to the garbage. It gets lost. And that's you're not supposed to do. So what did they want to make sure? That the hands, before they touch truma, should be clean. Because if they're dirty hands, and you touch the truma, you put it in your mouth, you could spit it out, you could throw it in the garbage. So how do you do that? So he didn't just say clean your hands, because, I'm not in the mood. He said your hands are tameh. So if you touch truma with your hands, you're making your truma tameh, because your hands are called a sheni, unless you washed your hands, and then your hands are not a sheni anymore, they're tahir. Now you could touch truma. If my hands touch chulin, I don't care, because my hands are a sheni. They're not going to be metame chulin. But truma is a shlishi, so my hands are going to be metame truma. So what happens now is, stam yadayim poislis es truma. But let's understand, if yadayim are shniyos, and they touch liquids, what happens to the liquid? The liquid becomes a rishon. That's why if a kohen would touch the wine of truma without washing his hands, it would be the same problem like touching bread. So why didn't they make a takana to wash your hands before you drink wine and before you drink water? The answer is because we don't drink water and wine by touching it. You're not supposed to touch your drinks. You're supposed to use a cup. You're not supposed to go like this. Bread, you're supposed to touch. You don't have somebody sticking the bread into your mouth. You understand? They would have made exactly the same takana before you drink water, before you drink wine, before you eat honey, before you drink milk, before you drink a coffee. You got to go to Utilis Yadayim. The mazel is, I said the mazel. The fact is, since drinks we don't touch, we use a cup, so the kohen won't touch it. So if he won't touch it, who cares? His Yadayim are not going to passel the cup. They passel the truma. So that's why there's no natilis yadayim by drinks. But it's really the same concept. But when there's a type of drink that you do touch, for example, karpas, where you take a piece of onion and potato and you're supposed to dip it in salt water with your hand, what's the halacha? You wash your hands. You wash your hands. Exactly the same reason why you wash for bread. Because mashka becomes tameh when it's touched by a sheni. Not only does it become tameh, it becomes a rishon. Not the karpas, the liquid. The karpas that's going into the liquid, that whole liquid is going to become tameh. Yeah. Rabbinically. And if that liquid touches truma, tameh. That's true. Yeah, you're right. 100%. Very good. The liquid becomes a rishon, and the karpas now becomes a sheni. Very good. And if the potato touches truma, the truma becomes a shlishi. You're right. Now you might say, ooh, but what happens if I touch my coffee? The answer is, it's not the way you do it. You don't touch your coffee. You're not supposed to. Can it happen? Of course it can happen. Of course it can happen. But the Chacham would not make a gzeira on that. That you have to go wash your hands before. Yeah, it's not a common thing. We're not worried that the kohen is going to start putting his finger into the wine that he drinks. You don't do that with your kiddush. Could you do it? Yeah, if there's a bug, I mean. Unless it's Shabbos. Yeah. Challah is a problem. Now you can ask a bigger question. Why don't we make a bracha? Why by karpas? Right, why don't we make a bracha? Why do we do it without a bracha? Before bread, by rachza, right, what does every kid say at the Seder? Mamachnishkem bracha. By rachza, we're going to make a bracha. And here we're not going to make a bracha. Why not? What's the difference? If it's the same idea, you're dipping food into drinks, you're dipping karpas into salt water. Mayim is one of the 7 beverages, right? So the answer is as follows. I'll just, it's halacha l'maisa, so it's actually very good to know. This is from Siman Kuf Nun Ches, Chaim and Shulchan Aruch of the Balatanya, the Shulchan Aruch Harav. He says, when you drink, you never have to wash your hands because you're not supposed to touch the drink. Okay, right? That's clear. That he said before, that if you drink, you don't have to wash your hands. because it's because you're not supposed to touch it. But if you're eating something that you dip in a liquid, right? Whether you're dipping it now or you made it wet earlier and it wasn't dried, right? Like you dip your cherries or your grapes in water, so you have to wash your hands first. Why? Because we know that mashkim are much more susceptible to tumah because they don't need hechsher, right? Mashkim are much more susceptible to tumah. And we also know that even mashke chulin, if your hands touch it, it becomes a rishon l'tumah and could be metame other foods and other liquids because it's a rishon. So the Chachamim were much more afraid of truma. They were much more afraid that what? They were much more afraid with mashke because it's so easy to become tameh. And therefore they said that anything that has mashke, you have to do netilas yadayim, even if you're drinking water or honey, which is not truma. Wine and oil is truma, could be truma, but oil and honey not still. And even if you're only dipping the edge of the cucumber, not the whole thing. So what's the problem? You're not touching the mashka, right? Like you take the onion and you dip it in, so what's the big deal? But we're afraid you may come touch it. Yeah. And even if you decide you're going to eat it with a spoon, but since it's a normal thing that people are dipping it in with their hands, so you may forget, and the next piece you may dip in, right? Or if it's wet, you may put it into your mouth because it's a normal thing to eat it with your hand. It's not like a drink where you're not supposed to touch it. So therefore, you should do netilas yadayim. But if it's something that people usually eat through a spoon or a fork or a toothpick, then there's no gzeira that you might touch it because it's not the normal way. And then even if you do touch it, you don't need netilas yadayim. Just like by drinking. Even if you're going to touch it, you don't need netilas yadayim, like to figure out how hot it is. Why? Because it's not the derech. It's not. Remember, what's the reason you need netilas yadayim? The Chachamim were afraid. They wanted koyanim to always wash their hands before meals. Why? Because they may eat truma, right? But if you're not eating truma, I don't really care. So even with drinks, you may touch it. Okay, so what? They're not going to make a gzeira for something that happens once a year. Doesn't make sense. Although it's becoming tumah. Right. Of course, if I'm a kohen and it's honey, it's oil, I shouldn't touch it, of course. But I'm not worried that if I touch my coffee to feel the heat, so then if you're a kohen and Mashiach comes, you're going to start touching oil and honey with your stam yadayim. Because I don't touch my coffee. So even if I do touch it, they're not going to say, okay, you want to touch it, go do netilas yadayim. Same thing here. You have herring is often dipped into, what's herring? What do they put herring in? Oil or whatever, right? So that's a davar shnei b'mashke, yeah? But I don't know, maybe here it's different. But a lot of people only eat it with a fork or a toothpick, right? No? Dafka with the hands? Okay, so,
Rabbi Jacobson, is that why, and it's raining a few weeks ago, in pickle, you had a napkin around?
Yes.
But they talk about the year.
Because pickles often people eat with their hands and they stick it in, or it's already wet. So you mamish have to wash your hands before. You can't just eat it because it's regular mashkin. Unless your derech is to always eat with a napkin, with a toothpick, with a fork, then you could, and even if you touch it, it's not a big deal. As long as it's not the way, as long as it's not the way.
The joke about the hearing, there was one piece left and the lights went out.
Yeah.
So what you're gonna say, why is it you don't
Yeah, 1 second. Not only that, you know how kids go camping and they're thirsty and they see a river and what do? They all go with their hands like this. They don't have to do netilas yadayim. Why not? They're being metama the mashkin. Again, the answer is because they were not mesake netilas yadayim for things that are not part of a regular occurrence. Eating bread is a normal thing. You touch it and you eat bread, right? Dipping a food into liquid you do with your hands. But drinking with your hands water is not a normal thing. Or sometimes people will dip their hand in oil, in honey, right? That's a normal thing. Right? You dip in, you don't need netilas yadayim. Because anything that the primary way of eating it or drinking it is through a keli, you don't need Netilas Yadayim. Even if you decide to touch it, we don't care. As long as it's not regular. The question is, the Balatanya continues, in our countries in Eastern Europe, most people do not wash their hands when they do this. They were eating pickles on Shabbos and nobody was washing their hands. So he says that the limut zchus, the way to justify it is that there are a few Rishonim, and this is a very interesting machlek, because there are a few Rishonim, which is basically the shitta of Tosfos in Masechta Pesachim. And what they hold is that Netilas Yadayim, for something that you dip in liquids, only existed in their days when they used to eat betahara. They used to eat with purity. But today that everyone is Tmei Mesim, Yeah. Everyone, we don't have the ability to really cleanse ourselves. They felt that this takana is not applicable today. So he says like this. No, if you dry the fruit first, then you're good. Then you're good according to everybody. Yeah, if you make the grapes wet and then you dry it up and you didn't touch it, then you're good. He says, but most poskim hold like the first svara that you still have to wash your hands, but that's why we don't make a bracha, because some Rishonim hold that you don't have to, and Safek brachas lahakal. It's Kufta Svava Maral of the last Tosfos. Kol shetibule b'mashke tzarech netila. Right? So Rashi says, why? Because it's matama the mashkem. Kufta Svava Maral of Mamash on the bottom of the page, the last Tosfos. Kufta Svav. So the shit of Tosfos is that we are not careful with Tumah and eating Eichel and Tmeyin, and we don't need this Netila, and it's a brachal of Atala. That's what he holds. This is the shit of Tosfos. That's why we don't make a bracha. No, we hold that you have to wash your hands. That's why we do it by the Seder, but we do it without a bracha because of this shitta. If it's a davar shetibule b'mashke and the derech is not to eat it with a spoon or a fork, you have to wash your hands, like by the Seder. Huh? If you have somebody who's always makbet to eat everything with a toothpick or a fork, right, and it's a normal thing for him, and I guess a lot of people do it, so it's not batla daite, then he wouldn't have to.
Today they have all the dips.
Yeah, but dips are not a mashka. Right? Sesame seeds are not a mashka. You need one of the 7... what's called a mashka is the 7 mashkim, right? That's the shit of the Rambam. 7 mashkim, which is the water, and the wine, and the oil, and the milk, and the dew, and the bee honey.
So he was asking, when we're eating grapes, we're washing our hands? When you wash it with water?
The derech to eat grapes is with your hand. Right. If it's wet, according to most Rishonim, you have to wash your hands, but you don't make a bracha. Also, food itself is not makabel tumah until it becomes muksher. Right, and also your yadayim are not going to be metama food. The only problem is truma or liquids. Right. Food itself doesn't get affected by yadayim unless it was truma. My hands, even if they're not washed, and the food has to be rinsed, but even if the food is not rinsed, even if the food is rinsed and it touches my yadayim are a sheni, so it's not going to affect food that's chulin. Remember, food, nothing goes below sheni. Nothing could go below sheni, right? So nothing will happen to the food. Only liquid, the Chachamim made that it goes back to Rishon. Even if it touches a sheni, it goes back to Rishon. Right? Or it's truma, then you have a problem. 1 second, what?
Why would make a bracha and not make a bracha? I didn't get the end result in the bracha there.
So because there's a machloikas or Rishonim, if today there's a chiyuv to wash your hands on a davar shetibule b'mashka, Tosfos holds not, and therefore you shouldn't make a bracha. So Safek brachas lahakal, we do it without a bracha. That's why by this Seder, the first washing is without a bracha.
Every oil you touch with your hand, you need to wash. Every oil decided
No. Oichel, you don't have to ever wash your hands.
Bread. Why bread?
Bread, because most truma was made into bread. That was what it was. Most grain was made into bread. Cookies not, because they usually was not truma. What happened was, it's grain, but the derech was that they used to make most grain from truma. Most truma was made into bread. It was also made into wine. It was also made into oil, but you don't touch wine or oil. But bread you do touch, right? And the yadayim is a sheni. So if your son-in-law is a kohen, and you're sitting together by the Shabbos meal, right? And his wife brought all the chalas of truma for Shabbos, for him and all of his kids to eat, and her to eat, yeah? And he has to go wash his hands and go find a place to wash his hands, and you don't. And it gets very complicated. So they made that everybody, before they eat bread, will wash their hands. So that way, the kohanim will never touch bread without washing their hands. So they'll never touch truma without washing their hands. Sometimes they're eating bread that's not truma, fine, but most times not. Why is it my problem? I'm a Yisrael. The issue is because Yisraelim and kohanim live together, and to make a certain part of the population go wash their hands, and nobody else is going to become weak. It's like, we're all sitting at a simcha, now I have to walk 10 minutes to go wash. I'm going to say, you know what, forget it, it's chulin. Now, here, the kohen is an erlich yid, but he has to go 10 minutes to wash his hands before the bris, before eating breakfast, right after the bris. Nobody else is doing it. He has to do it. He says, you know what, it's chulin. So he doesn't wash his hands. Now he comes home, he eats bread without washing his hands. What happened? He was just matama his truma. So how do they get rid of this? Now you might say, come on, these things. Today you say, come on, because of this takana. You understand? Just like I told you once, right? We learned in Tosfos that you have to burn chametz, not be mevatel, because you're going to come to eat it. So Bacha once told me, who's going to eat chametz on Pesach? I said, if the preparations to Pesach would have taken 3 seconds by doing bittul, everybody would eat chametz on Pesach. Not everybody. But chalamoyed, you come down, and there's a piece of babka, you forget. Today we're so crazy about chametz. Who's going to eat chametz on Pesach? I said, your very question shows the proof of what the Chazal were doing. Your question. You're like, who's going to eat chametz? Exactly. Because they did b'dik and beer, because everybody's going crazy with candles and feathers looking for chametz. So yeah, you're not going to eat chametz. If you wouldn't have that, of course you would eat chametz by mistake. Right? If we wouldn't have this, the kohen, nobody washes their hands for anything. You just eat and eat and eat. So a kohen comes to every simcha, he doesn't wash his hands. He comes to his father-in-law's house, doesn't wash his hands. He eats wherever he doesn't wash his hands, because nobody's washing their hands. So in his house, there's a piece of bread. He doesn't wash his hands. So what happens? It becomes tameh. So what did they make a takana? Everybody's washing their hands always. You don't touch bread. You don't eat bread without washing your hands. So therefore, what happens? What happens is the kohen is so used to it. So he's always going to wash his hands. So why are you allowed to touch bread without washing your hands? Because you don't usually touch bread. You eat bread. You don't walk around touching bread. It's not a derech. We're not afraid of things that are uncommon. So why don't we wash our hands on brownies or babka or cheesecake? And the answer is, today cake is a huge industry, but very little, most truma was turned into bread. Today Baruch Hashem, there's 2 things today. We have such a surplus of food that there's so much extra, okay? Plus, we have a sweet tooth that we're all busy with. Then, there was these things of babkas. You know what the snacks were, right? Scorched grain. You took barley kernels, you roasted them, and that was the snack. You imagine the snacks today? Huh? Not potato chips and ice cream and sprinkle cake. Huh? I'm saying you have to understand that. And there was no surplus of food. So you had food, you turned it into bread. Sourdough bread. Huh? You turned it into bread. Huh? No, you're wrong. The Kohanim worked in the Beis HaMikdash only 2 weeks out of the year. There were 24 mishmaros, 24 groups. If
you make the whole Bnei Yisrael wash the hands.
No. But listen to this. This is one layer. But how many Jews were saved from the Black Plague because of hygiene? No. It created tremendous hygiene.
Washing your hands, Tumah, and it has nothing to do with cleanliness.
Let's not judge Judaism based on your experience in yeshiva.
But that's my only filter in life. No?
Is it possible?
Our only filter in life is our Rabbi, no?
Is it possible that they made it that comes because?
Lenny, we love you.
Is it possible that they made it that comes because?
Both are very real. Both are very real. It's not disingenuous because it's disingenuous because you were told that cleanliness is not part of Judaism. What if I show you a Rambam who says that to be a Jew you have to be a clean person physically?
40 years ago when I needed you.
I'm saying people sometimes they look at Judaism as some religion that's divorced from the world, but it's not true. There's a whole Bryce at the end of Saita about Nikios. There's a Rambam in Hilchis Machal, he explains a whole thing about how important cleanliness is. Physical, not talking about spiritual.
And he even talks about bacteria, no? He thinks like...
Yes, and that's why water is such a powerful thing in Judaism. It's spiritual also, but it's also... And how many women died, that famous story in Vienna, after childbirth, because the doctors weren't washing their hands, right? I'm saying it's a tremendous thing that happened. Why they accused the Jews of the Black Plague? Because they were dying much less, because Netilas Yadayim. So there were also tremendous, they weren't afraid Yisrael was going to eat a Kohen's Tumah.
Sitting all together.
Because it's a very serious issue. But let's say they were afraid. What are they supposed to do?
Then according to the Maya, I'll go to a Kohen's house and eat. Because excited I'm going to eat from the trim. No?
The Kohen, and you have to be careful. Remember, for Yisrael, it's like treif. You're allowed to go even to a guy's house. It's not a problem. He has to be careful. It's like chametz on Pesach. It's a Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma. It's a missa b'dei shamayim. It's a very serious issue. No, we're afraid that Kohen touching the bread without washing his hands. Yeah. Fakert. Now all the hands are washed, so we're good.
Just the Kohen should wash.
They don't let booze either.
Right. The reason we made the Kohen should wash is because Kohenim and Yisraelim ate so much together constantly. Because mishpachas, families, communities, constantly. So if the Kohen would be the only one to wash, and not the Yisrael, no, but here it's different. The halachas that he does privately, the Beis HaMikdash in his house, there's halachas, right? You're sitting at a simcha, you're sitting at a bris, you're sitting at a Shabbos meal. You're sitting anytime you're sitting. Forget a Shabbos meal. You're sitting at a regular dinner with your brother-in-law, with your father-in-law, right? With your grandson. Nobody is washing. You're the only one washing. He says, why am I washing? Is this truma? No, it's chulin. Okay.
So a Kohen has to wash even when he eats chulin?
Everybody had to wash for chulin.
That's excited after.
Yeah.
The Kohen has to wash when asking.
Well, it started together, in other words. Because a Kohen, we wanted he should wash his hands always before bread. Even chulin, because he eats so much truma. So therefore we made that everyone should wash their hands before bread. Because most truma that's eaten was bread. Roiv trumas were bread. Because minat Torah, truma is only dagan, tirish, v'yitzar, which is grain, wine, and oil. Now wine and oil you don't touch. You drink with a cup. Wine and oil. Right? But dagan, which is the 5 types of grain, the derech of eating it is to make from it bread. That was just the derech. That's, by the way, why pas haba b'kisnin, why that which was not a derech to make it into that type of bread, you don't wash because of that reason, because it's not regular. That's why pas chulin, they only had to wash their hands if it's pas that you usually make a sudan, because that would be the truma usually. That would usually be the truma. You could make truma into babka, but since it's not usual, they weren't afraid about that. The Kohen will be careful, but that which was the common thing, it wasn't uncommon. They were very, very conscientious.
So even today, it is a common thing. You make a scene of it. You don't have to.
No, it was not common in the house. Other things were not common in the house. For example, take grain. Let's say they don't make bread. They don't make grain into bread. It's stam grain. Yeah, the truma is minatayra, but a kohen doesn't have to wash his hands if he's nashing from regular grain, because it wasn't the derech, so it wasn't common in the house. What was common was bread. Taka by pasa babakis, like they'll say, if you're eating mezainas bread or pizza, kshir kviyas suda, a shear that the derech would be to be kaveh sud on it.
Then, that time, they didn't have...
Right, but I'm saying, but if we're eating pasa babakis and the shear that the derech is to be kaveh sud on it, you would have to wash for the same reason. Just like you have to make Monsey, you have to make it until Isidayim. Because it has the gather of regular pas. Because you kaveh sud on it. So that was the vart. Today you'll say, Koyanim are not eating truma because of Tumah, so what's the big deal? The answer is, they weren't mavatal it because they wanted Yidden should be ragil. The Beis HaMikdash will come, hey Rabbi Yameinu, they should all be ready to eat betara because they're right away going to go back to truma. So if imagine for 2,000 years we don't wash our hands, suddenly Mashiach will come. You'll eat bread azay and the truma will become tamah. Right. And to start it new would be very hard. So it's a fascinating thing that the Tilas Yadayim throughout all the years of Galus is because of the preparation for Mashiach. Verstandig? That the reason that Mashke has so much more Tumah is because it's the great transmitter. Transmits everything. Transmits everything. It's the koyach of hafatza, of spreading. Mayim takes something that's contained in one place and it transfers it everywhere. It brings it everywhere. And l'makim namuch, the water won't stop.
Right, always seeking the lowest possible.
Yeah, always looks at it searches for the lowest possible surface. And if it can go further down, it'll go further down. Which spiritually represents the idea that it takes something, an energy, and it spreads it far and wide. That's the kayach of it. And whenever you have such powerful potential, you become extra vulnerable to Tumah, because we always say that Tumah is attracted to greatness. It's not attracted to smallness. Yeah, a tsunami, yeah. It sweeps, yeah, it transfers. That's the power of water. But just water itself, it's a traveler, it's a transmitter. That's what it does. Moist. The bacterias, yeah.
Only walking if you have some nasty.
So we have it in science. We have it in science. Yeah, even the moist in the ear, the bacteria, the germs, it uses that moist, that wetness to travel. So the laws of science come from Torah. It comes from the laws of Tumah and Tara. It's all connected. With all due respect to your teacher. So it's all connected. In other words, there's the bacteria and the spiritual bacteria that also the moist captures and brings forth in a very powerful way. Nekiyas, Tosfos says Nekiyas.
Wie de andere plaats, Gedusha Nekiyas. Kemoi ben Ame, wie wird auch gebringt, Yisod. Wie de Mesech, Chilin allein, Chilin Kivuf.
Tosfos learns that you wash your hands for bread because of Kedusha and Nekiyas. When a Jew eats bread, it's like when you ate a carbon. A shulchan is a mizbeach. Your hands have to be holy because you're doing avodas Hashem. Like before davening, so similar before eating. And also your hands have to be clean. That's what Tosfos holds. That's why you make a bracha. But davar shetibulei b'mashken is only mitzat tumah. And Tosfos says today there's no tumah and tara, so therefore it doesn't apply. But we forget from what your teacher said. But we paskin lahalacha that the reason we wash by bread is also mitzat tumah v'tara. Most poskim. And that's why davar shetibulei b'mashke you have to wash your hands. But because of shidduch haTosfos we don't make a bracha. Yeah. Yeah. Huh? No. Lahalacha, most Rishonim hold that you have to wash your hands when you eat wet grapes. But we don't make a bracha because Safek bracha is lahakal, and some Rishonim hold you're not allowed to make a bracha because the whole mitzvah doesn't apply now. They hold that the halach of washing your hands before you eat a davar shetibulei b'mashke was only applicable in a time when Tumah and Tara was practiced. But now at no, even not Yisraelim, there was a concept of oichlim chulam betara. We have pure homes, even if you're not a kohen. The Yisraelim who ate chulam betara. Chavein and Prushim, they would follow the laws of ritual purity. That means if a person touched a sheretz, he would not touch his cereal or his egg. Even if he's not a kohen, he wouldn't touch his water, even though it's not a big deal halachically. I'm allowed to eat tamadika food. Even a kohen is allowed to eat tamadika food. It's not advisable, but he's allowed to. It's not advisable because if he eats tamid food, then rabbinically he becomes tamid, he becomes a sheni. And now if he touches truma, a kohen is allowed to be tamid. He's not allowed to be tamid Matos-Maasei. That's the issur. Matos-Maasei, he's not. Kohen is allowed to touch a sheretz. It's not a good idea because if he touches a sheretz, he's now a rishon. If he comes home, he touches the chalet, truma, he can't with some mikveh, she can't eat karbonas. It's a disaster. He has to go to the mikveh, he has to wait till the night. So you have to be careful, right? The Chaim did not want him, but it wasn't a prohibition. It wasn't a prohibition. But also Yisraelim who also ate betara. Why? Even though you're not halachically obligated, right? It's called living a spiritually sensitive life. For example, there's people who will not eat carbs. There's people who will often not eat for a few days. They'll only juice, right? Like in Rabbi Aaron's family. Why? It's not an issur to eat, but they're sensitive. They want their bodies to be, their bodies are sensitive. They want cleansing. Spiritually also, you have different standards of living, right? There's people who go to the mikveh every morning. Why? You don't have to go to the mikveh every day. You don't have to go Shabbos. We go Erev Yom Kippur. The bottom line is that what is it? It's an extra level of sensitivity. Tumah is a real reality. It's like a certain type of a bacteria, a living bacterium. There's positive bacteria, and they wanted to really be completely clean. They were very sensitive. When something is tameh, it's not like you're not allowed to touch it, but the contact affects you. You're less sensitive. You're less sensitive. Yeah. When we don't have it because we can't get rid of the tumah because we don't have a paraduma. We all have a suffix Matos-Maasei. We can't get rid of it because we don't have the ashes of the paraduma, because we don't have the halachas to be able to do the paraduma. But within that, there could be a lot of levels of tumah and tara. Yeah, but Tosfos says this concept it's pointless. It's pointless. You're not going to be metamed the mashka. Who cares if you're metamed the mashka? So becomes a rishon. So becomes a rishon. What's the big deal? You're tamei meis. What do I care if you're a rishon? You're an avatuma. You're tamei meis. So Tosfos says, broit is only for kedusha. You're having a meal. It's avodas Hashem. Your hands have to be holy, not tumah. It's like washing your hands before davening. You make a bracha because it's a kana d'Rabbanan, and also nekius. Before you eat, you have to have clean hands. You have to have clean hands. That's what they want. Hygiene. Tosfos.
So wash your hands with soap.
So you have, because there's the concept of kedusha. The concept of kedusha. How the mayim comes, but most Rishonim disagree. They hold that Birchas Hamazon, that the Netilas Yadayim is because of Tumah and Tara. It's because Kayanim. It's not because of cleanliness and Kedusha. There's a difference between Kedusha and Tumah and Tara. It's two separate things. Kedusha is not Tumah and Tara. A Kayan could be very clean, but before he came into the Beis HaMikdash, he sanctified his hands and the feet by the kiyur. It was an inyan of Kedusha. So he can before davening. Doesn't mean it may be clean, right? You wash your hands. It's a special kedusha before the meal. That's what Tosfos holds. That's one shit of Mayim Achronim. Why do we do Mayim Achronim at the end of the meal? There's two reasons. One is Melach Zdaimis. They used to have very serious salt, and if you touch your eyes, it can blind it. So you had to wash your hands before the end of the meal to make sure there's no salt. Today we don't have that salt, right? But there was another reason. You're about to bench. Before you bench, you have to sanctify your hands. According to the first reason, there's no mitzvah of Mayim Achronim today. According to the second reason, there is. That's why we do Mayim Achronim, but there's communities, they don't do Mayim Achronim. Right? So the same is true by Netilas Yadayim. Since most poskim hold Netilas Yadayim is not only cleanliness, but also mitzvah tumah and tara, so davar shetibule b'mashka still applies. That's the machlokes basically. No, you have to do it always.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.